The night I found my boss standing alone on a hotel terrace in 20-degree Chicago wind, I almost turned around and went back inside. She was a woman who made senior partners nervous in conference rooms. She had never once asked me how my weekend was. She had built an entire professional reputation on being unreachable. So what exactly was I going to say to her? I didn't know. I still went. My name is Lucas Farrow, and 7 months before that night, I had driven into Chicago from Knoxville, Tennessee, with everything I owned packed into a rented cargo van and $4,200 in my checking account. That was it. That was the whole safety net. My father had worked 30 years at a distribution warehouse before his back gave out, and my mother cleaned houses on the north side of town until her knees stopped cooperating. Neither of them had ever owned a passport. Neither of them had ever eaten at a restaurant where the entrees didn't have prices on the menu. But they had worked every single day without complaint, and somewhere along the way, that became the thing I was most proud of. Not where I came from, the fact that they never used where they came from as a reason to stop. When I got the job offer from Pallister and Wren Consulting, I thought I had misread the email. A junior financial analyst position at one of Chicago's oldest and most respected firms. The kind of place that had a waiting list for internships. The kind of place where people like me didn't usually end up. I accepted before they finished the sentence. The first week was everything I had hoped for. Glass-walled offices on the 38th floor of a building on Wacker Drive. Lake Michigan visible from the conference rooms. Colleagues who had gone to schools I had only seen on television. I felt like I was finally somewhere that matched the ambition I had been carrying around since I was 17 years old. Then I met Ingrid Pallister. She co-founded the firm 22 years earlier with a man named David Wren, and between the two of them, they had turned a two-person operation into a $30 million a year consultancy with clients across 6 industries. Inside the office, people called her the Wall, not to her face. No one did anything to her face except nod and take notes. But in the break room, in the elevator, in the hushed conversations that happened whenever she stepped into a meeting, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. She was brilliant in a way that was almost painful to watch. She could walk into a presentation 15 minutes late, glance at a single slide, and identify the one assumption the entire analysis rested on, and dismantle it in 30 seconds. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. When Ingrid Pallister looked at you across a conference table and said, "Walk me through your methodology," you felt it in your chest. She almost never smiled. Her emails were 4 words, sometimes 3. When I presented my first full analysis to her after 6 weeks on the job, a competitive market assessment I had spent 3 weekends building, she read the executive summary in silence, set it down, and said, "The 4th assumption on page 2 is wrong. Read it." That was the entire feedback session. No hello, no closing, just that. I went home that night and ate cereal for dinner because I couldn't afford to order food and also feel sorry for myself at the same time. By month 4, I had stopped expecting anything different. By month 6, I had started wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake. Not just about the job, about all of it. About the move, the van, the $4,200. About believing that working hard in a place like this would mean anything if the person above you had already decided you weren't worth her time. The resignation letter took me 2 evenings to write. Not because the words were hard, but because every time I finished a draft, I sat back and thought about my father's back and my mother's knees, and the way they had both looked at me the morning I drove out of Knoxville, like they were watching something they had worked for their entire lives. Finally moving toward the horizon. I saved the draft in my email as something I'd send after the company's annual awards dinner. Attendance was mandatory. I figured I could make it through one more evening. The dinner was held at the Peninsula on East Superior Street, in a ballroom that cost more per night than I made in a month. Crystal everywhere. White tablecloths pressed so flat, they looked like they had never been touched. The whole company was there, maybe 80 people, along with clients and a handful of board members who flew in specifically for the occasion. The kind of event where you wear the one good suit you own and hope nobody notices the left sleeve is slightly shorter than the right. I arrived on time, found my table, and spent the first hour making conversation with 2 colleagues I genuinely liked, and 1 board member who kept confusing me with someone named Preston. The food was excellent. The speeches were long, Awards were given out for client retention, for revenue growth, for 10-year service milestones. Champagne went around twice. Ingrid sat at the head table and did not drink any of it. I watched her the way I had gotten into the habit of watching her, carefully, from a distance, trying to understand the thing I kept failing to understand. Why someone with everything she had built still seemed so profoundly alone inside it. She was composed through the entire dinner. She gave a brief, precise speech about the firm's trajectory. She shook hands. She accepted a plaque from the board chairman with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then, around 9:30, she disappeared. I noticed because the table where she had been sitting was suddenly occupied by only board members and senior partners, and the energy in the room shifted slightly, the way it does when a storm system moves through. I told myself it was none of my business. I told myself to get another glass of water and make it to 10 o'clock, and then leave with whatever dignity I had left. Instead, I walked toward the exit that led to the hotel's east terrace. I don't fully understand why. Some part of me had been watching her all night, the way you watch someone carrying something too heavy, not because you can fix it, but because you can't quite look away. The terrace doors were heavy, and the cold hit me the moment I pushed through them. January in Chicago is not a suggestion. It is a declaration. The wind off the lake cut straight through wool, and the temperature that night was somewhere around 18 degrees with a wind chill that pushed it lower. I stopped in the doorway for a second, thinking I had imagined it. But she was there. Ingrid Pallister stood at the stone railing at the far end of the terrace, looking out over the city. She still had her blazer on, but she hadn't gone back for her coat, and her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. Not the posture of someone who had stepped outside for fresh air, but the posture of someone who had needed to be away from people so badly that the cold seemed like a fair trade. She didn't hear me come out. The wind was too loud. I walked across the terrace slowly, stopping a few feet to her left, and for a moment I just stood there beside her without saying anything. The skyline spread out in every direction, the lights of the loop, the dark stretch of the lake, the bridges lit up along the river. It was genuinely beautiful, the way Chicago is beautiful when you forget for a second that it is trying to freeze you. She turned her head and looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen before in 7 months of working for her. She looked frightened. Not startled, not annoyed, genuinely frightened, the kind of fear that has been building for hours and finally has nowhere left to hide. Her eyes were red at the edges, though whether from the cold or something else I couldn't have said. Her jaw was set the way it always was, but there was a tremor underneath it that she was working hard to control. She looked at me for a moment as if deciding something. Then she looked back at the skyline. I stayed where I was. Before we continue, if these stories of courage, loneliness, and unexpected kindness speak to something in you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Empathy Stories for more, and leave a comment below. We read everyone. Your support keeps these stories going. The wind picked up and she shivered once, sharp and involuntary. I shrugged off my suit jacket without thinking and held it out toward her. She stared at it for a moment like she wasn't sure what it was. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady but barely. "The jacket offer stands," I said. "You don't have to be fine to take it." Something shifted in her expression. She took it, pulled it around her shoulders without looking at me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The city hummed below us. A train crossed the river somewhere in the distance. I could hear my own heartbeat over the wind. Then she said, "David called me this afternoon." David Wren, her co-founder, her partner of 22 years, the other half of the name on the door. She didn't look at me while she said it. She kept her eyes on the water. "He's leaving the firm. He's been in talks with Cascade Partners for 4 months. He's taking the Meridian Group contract with him, and the Hollis account, and 2 others I can't name yet because the lawyers haven't finished. Those 4 accounts represent 38% of our annual revenue." I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. "He called at 3:15, she continued. "I had to sit in the leadership dinner for 3 hours after that and pretend everything was fine, because I didn't want to walk into this room and let everyone see that the person who's supposed to have all the answers has absolutely no idea what happens next." Her hand on the railing was shaking, not from the cold. I had spent 7 months believing that Ingrid Pallister was made of something different than the rest of us. Something harder, something more deliberate. I had spent 7 months feeling like an inconvenience to her. A file till she hadn't gotten around to closing, and now she was standing in 18-degree wind, borrowing a jacket from a junior analyst she had never once complimented because she had no one else to stand next to. I thought about the resignation letter sitting in my drafts folder. I thought about Knoxville. I thought about what it costs to carry something alone for so long that you start to forget what it felt like not to. I've been planning to quit, I said. She turned and looked at me. I drafted the resignation letter 2 nights ago. I was going to send it Monday morning. I met her eyes. I believed you hated me. The wind moved between us. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice had a quality I had never heard from her before. Careful, almost careful enough to break. I don't hate you, she said quietly. I have never once thought that about you. You don't show it. No, she said. I don't. I know that. She looked back at the city for a moment. I'm not good at. I've never been good at the part where you tell people what you actually think of them. I grew up in a house where praise was something you earned by achieving the next thing, not something you received for the thing you already did. I carried that into how I work, and I know it's not right. I've known that for a long time. This was the most she had ever said to me that wasn't about a deliverable. But I want you to know something, she continued. I noticed your work from the beginning. The market assessment you presented in September, the one I sent you back to redo, I sent you back because the 4th assumption was wrong. Not because the rest of it wasn't good. The rest of it was better than work I've seen from people with 5 more years of experience than you. She paused. I've been hard on you because I believed you could do better than good. I was not wrong about that, but I was wrong about how I showed it. I stood with that for a moment. Why didn't you just say that? I asked. She almost laughed. Not a full laugh, something smaller and more private. Because I'm an idiot, she said. A very successful idiot, apparently right up until today. And then something occurred to her. I could see it move across her face. I walked past your workstation around 4 o'clock, she said. You had stepped away for a few minutes. Your computer was still open. I wasn't trying to see your screen. I was leaving a printed memo on your desk, but the subject line of a draft email was visible. She looked at me. It said resignation L. Pharaoh. That's all I saw. I didn't open it, but I've been carrying it since 4 o'clock. The wind pushed against us. Below, the city kept moving, indifferent. That's part of why tonight has felt so impossible, she said. The call from David, and then that. 2 things I had no control over, both of them in the same afternoon. She looked at me steadily. I am not someone who asks for things easily. But I'm asking you directly, don't send that letter. Not yet. Give me the chance to be a better leader than I've been. Give the firm the chance to come through this. I thought about all the nights I had stayed until 9 o'clock refining something she had handed back to me without a word of acknowledgement. I thought about the quiet erosion of believing you are invisible. I thought about what it means to stay somewhere, not because it's easy, but because it might become something worth staying for. I thought about the fact that she was standing outside in January in my suit jacket, being more honest with me in 5 minutes than she had been in 7 months. I'm not quitting, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once the way she did when a meeting had reached its conclusion. But her shoulders dropped about half an inch, I noticed. We stood there a little longer in the cold, not talking. Sometimes that's the right thing. Sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is the fact that you didn't leave. When we finally went back inside, the dinner was winding down. A few people glanced at us. The junior analyst and the CEO, both slightly cold-looking, returning from somewhere nobody else had gone. I didn't explain it, neither did she. The next morning, I deleted the resignation letter. What followed was the hardest 12 months in the firm's history. The departure of David Wren sent shockwaves through our client base, and the board spent the first 3 months in nearly constant emergency sessions. 2 more clients reduced their contracts before the situation stabilized. We had to let 4 people go, which was the worst part, watching people pack their desks and knowing that none of it was their failure. But something else happened during those months. Something I didn't have a word for at the time. Ingrid changed. Not in the dramatic overnight way that makes for a clean narrative. She changed slowly, the way someone changes when they are genuinely paying attention to what they've been getting wrong. She started holding brief team check-ins on Monday mornings, not to deliver directives, but to ask what people were working through. She started responding to presentations with specific acknowledgments before the critiques. She started saying things like, "I'm not sure about this. What do the rest of you think?" in meetings and meaning it, and then actually listening to the answers. The first time she did that, the conference room went so quiet you could hear the HVAC system. Gradually, though, people started responding. The analysts started talking more openly in strategy sessions. Junior staff started bringing ideas that they would have previously kept to themselves. A woman on the research team, someone who had been almost as invisible as I had felt, proposed a new client acquisition model in February that ended up bringing in 2 contracts by June. Ingrid cited that woman by name in the board presentation first thing, before anything else. I watched the research analyst's face when Ingrid said her name in front of the full board. I recognized that expression. It was the expression of someone who had been carrying the weight of being unseen for a long time, and had just felt it lift. I had been carrying that same weight myself for 7 months. I understood what it cost, and I understood what it meant when someone finally put it down on your behalf. By the following spring, the firm had stabilized. We closed 3 new client relationships, 2 of which were in sectors we hadn't previously worked in. Revenue was still down from our peak, but the trajectory had reversed, and the board had stopped calling emergency sessions. We changed the firm's name, quietly, without ceremony, to Pallister Consulting. A new chapter that didn't erase the history, just didn't let it define the ceiling. My role expanded during that period in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was given lead responsibilities on 2 major accounts. I started managing a small team of analysts, 3 people who were, in some cases, better than I was at specific things, and learning to say so openly rather than quietly compensating. I thought about where I had learned that particular lesson. I thought about a hotel terrace in January, and a borrowed suit jacket, and someone being honest with me for the first time about what they actually saw. Ingrid is still demanding. She will probably always be demanding. She still sends short emails. She still walks into presentations and identifies the weakest assumption in the room inside of 30 seconds. She has not turned into someone she isn't. But last fall, during a particularly brutal week of negotiations with a client who kept moving the terms, she called me into her office at 7 in the evening, after almost everyone else had gone home. She poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine on her credenza. She knew how I took mine, which I noticed, and she said without preamble, "I need a second opinion and I trust yours. Tell me what you actually think." We worked through it together for 2 hours. When we found the path forward, she looked at me across the table and said, "Good, that's the one." Then she stood up and said, "Go home, Lucas. You've been here since 7 this morning." That was it. That was the whole thing. But from her, it was everything. I've thought a lot, in the 18 months since that terrace, about what it means to stay somewhere when leaving. Would have been easier. My father stayed at the warehouse for 30 years, not because he didn't want something different, but because he understood the cost of walking away from something you're still part of. My mother went to work on knees that had been telling her to stop for years, because she knew the difference between tired and finished. I used to think staying was the passive choice, the thing you did when you ran out of better options. I don't think that anymore. Sometimes staying is the decision that changes everything. Not because the place you're staying is perfect, but because it has the potential to become something neither of you could build alone. Leadership isn't what it looks like from the outside. From the safe distance of someone who has never had to carry it, it is heavy and quiet and full of decisions nobody sees. And even the strongest people, especially the strongest people, need someone to stand beside them when they are standing alone in the cold. I offered that once without thinking. I would offer it again without hesitating. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Has there been a moment when someone chose to stay, with you, beside you, on your behalf, and it changed the direction of things? Leave your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please share it with someone in your life who might need to hear it today. Like the video, subscribe to Empathy Stories, and we'll keep bringing you these moments that remind us what we're capable of when we choose the harder, more human thing. Sometimes the smallest act, walking through a door towards someone standing alone in the cold, is the one that changes two lives forever.